Bom dia a todos. É um prazer de abrir mais uma live da Câmara Brasil-Israel, nossa primeira de 2021, depois de termos feito mais de 20 lives no ano de 2020, mais um seminário internacional Amazon Tech. Estamos aqui hoje trazendo uma tecnologia inédita de Israel, que foi recentemente noticiada nos meios de comunicação no mundo inteiro, inclusive no Brasil, com grande ênfase, sobre o transplante de córnea artificial. E conseguimos trazer nessa live Almog Aley-Raz e o Gilad Litvin, que são sócios cofundadores da CorNeat Vision. E temos também um convidado mais do que especial, nosso amigo Cláudio Lottenberg, que é vice-presidente do Conselho da Câmara também, e o Cláudio é um grande, se não o maior especialista no Brasil nessa área de oftalmologia e de transplantes de córneas. E eu tenho o prazer de ter esses três convidados hoje na Câmara. Almog, Gilad, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's a real pleasure to have both of you here with us and to bring the news and the good news about your technology of CorNeat. Cláudio, it's a real pleasure to have you here with us. Cláudio is going to moderate this conversation with Almog and Gilad, talking about a few words about each one of you. Almog Aley-Raz is the co-founder and CEO of CorNeat. He has hands-on technology experience in several startups companies. Gilad Litvin, doctor, is a co-founder and chief medical officer of CorNeat Vision. Dr. Litvin is graduate of the Hebrew University Medical School in Jerusalem. Thank you both of you. And Cláudio Lottenberg is vice president of the board of the BRIL Chamber. Cláudio is the chair of the board of the Albert Einstein Hospital in Brazil, chair of the Israelite Confederation in Brazil, CONIB, chair of the Instituto Coalizão Saúde. And special information, Cláudio is an ophthalmologist specialized in implant of cornea, and in the last 30 years, Cláudio made more than 1,500 implants of the cornea in Brazil. So it's a very great track record of Cláudio about the subject that we are going to discuss this morning and this afternoon in Israel. So thank you very much again. And Almog and Gilad, please, you have the floor from now on and talk about CorNeat Vision. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Renato, for the invitation. Thank BRIL. And of course, Claudio, for joining us. It's a real big pleasure speaking here on your channel. As you mentioned, I'm the co-founder of CorNeat Vision. I'm an eye doctor, an ophthalmologist. I completed residency and then did a fellowship in surgical retinal diseases. But cornea has always been some focus point of interest for me. During my tenure at the hospital, I drafted a first patent specifically for a glaucoma device. And through the knowledge that I gained from this project, I started thinking about a patent for a corneal replacement solution. And on 2015, I drafted a patent for an artificial cornea and founded together with Almog this company. And since then, we've been developing our device. Now, our device has various different properties and characteristics that allow things that in the past were not possible. Until recently, the only real viable solution for corneal blindness is transplanting cornea from a deceased individual into an eye which is blind due to corneal problem. And the problem with artificial solutions was not the lens, for example, that replaces the cornea, but rather the integration of this lens within our own tissues. And with CorNeat, we changed the approach. Previous attempts tried to attach an artificial lens to our corneal tissue. And this tissue is, as you know, transparent. And because it is transparent, it doesn't have any blood vessels, has very few cells, so it heals very poorly. And when the attempted integration of an artificial solution in the past was attempted on this tissue, on the cornea, the attempts failed. Being a retinal surgeon, I know a bit about the anatomy of the posterior segment of the eye. And specifically, there are areas of attachment there that look to me with much more potential. In parallel, I was exposed to various chemical engineering technologies and found one that can produce structures that imitate our own body's microanatomy very, very beautifully. And after a few experiments that we performed on these different materials, but with this technology, we found a certain polymer that encouraged our own cells to invade this material and proliferate within our material. And since then, we've been developing this device, which has an optical member, and this specific polymer matrix that imitates our own biological anatomy of our own tissues, using that in order to integrate the device in this posterior area, this novel area beneath the conjunctiva of our eye. This area has a lot of blood vessels and a lot of cellular elements and can heal very, very vigorously. And then actually what we did is we took this device and started testing it, initially in animals. And this conversation now with you is because we were able to succeed in implanting it in our first human. And I'll let Almog tell a bit about all the development process and everything else.
Yeah. So basically, just to summarize what Gilad said, our main problem was how to integrate a lens, which is a synthetic material, to the ocular tissue and make it last for life. That's the problem that we were able to resolve and proven it in animals. In about 1.5 to 2 years, we'll complete the clinical trial and have the proof points that will enable us to achieve FDA clearance, CE mark in Europe, and of course, go through the regulatory process in Brazil so we can offer the solution also there. So I joined Gilad, while this was a patent, an idea, and I bring to this table experience from the Israeli high-tech industry, which I joined after 8 years in the Israeli Air Force. So throughout my career, I managed multidisciplinary projects that combine a lot of technologies together to bring a solution to market. I did manage a startup all the way to an exit and sold it to an American company. So I'm really well averse in all of the processes that a company needs to go through in order to succeed. But besides that, I'm also an engineer. And, during the garage days, it was me and Gilad trying to figure this out and building things on our own, eventually succeeding to bring out this product. So it's very different developing a medical device and developing software for enterprise and financial services, and there are no shortcuts. We cannot risk our patients. We cannot even risk animals. If we and we have to be really convinced that what we have it really works, and also go through a long list of bench tests and biocompatibility tests before we can reach humans. And this milestone not just prove to the world that this surgery can be done, it also proved that everything that we've done before that was done properly and was completed successfully. Now, since then, we have realized that these specific materials has a lot of applications in ophthalmology and also beyond ophthalmology. If you think about it, what we were able to do is to implant a material within the body that basically merge with it and does not disappear, does not dissolve over time. And today we have actually 4 products out in development and IP and patents for additional products also outside of ophthalmology that can leverage this technology and provide much better solutions to humans and to medical problems than tissue does, or collagen-based matrices, which are today are produced from animal tissue.
I would like maybe to conclude and just tell on a personal note. When I drafted this patent, I sought investors, and I've known Almog for years, and I asked for his advice. I told him, this is my presentation. He told me, this is a doctor's presentation. Let me see it. And he looked it over. He told me, give me a couple of days. And he gave it back to me. The investor wanted to invest, but I found myself joining forces with Almog. So on a personal note, this is started as a friendship. We bike together. We do a lot of activities together. And eventually we were able to found this company and use both of our capabilities and experience in order to take this project from an idea all the way into a blind man who hasn't seen for 10 years and now is able to see.
Yeah, and I would summarize that if you look at this little implant, it is a junction where physics, optics, biology, and chemistry can all come together. And I'm not talking about the manufacturing process, which is really complex as well, but if you pour in also friendship, you have a recipe for success.
Okay, thank you, Claudio. Please, now is your time and you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank deeply Renato Ochman, my personal friend, even before being the president of our chamber, for this prestige of inviting me to be here with this such a distant group from Israel, who I have already met when I was in Israel a couple of months before. We are discussing here, we have to take into consideration that we do not have only here doctors, but also investors, people that want to understand exactly not only the perspective under the business, but under the conditions of what it can represent. And first, Renato, I would like to register that we have among our audience Professora Denise de Freitas, one of the most respected doctors under corneal transplantation here in our country. The cornea is a natural tissue that we have in front of the eye, in the anterior part of the eye, and it has the responsibility of allowing us to have a good vision. In the moment that you have lack of transparency, of lack of the anatomy, we have the image in a bad condition. And one of the most important fields in terms of transplantation was the cornea, exactly because the reaction against the rejection is very low. By the other hand, we have to understand that's not so simple, because we have cases where you have rejection, and this kind of tool that was created is something that can open a new opportunity, mainly to this kind of cases. More than that, we have to realize that we have each year more than 2 million cases that are going to need transplantation. We have right now, all over the world, more than 30 million people that are blind because of diseases in the cornea, and we have lack of tissues. We have countries like United States where it's much easier, but you have other places where it's not so easy to achieve and to get the number of corneas that would be necessary in terms to make these people to have their vision back. So the idea to create something like this, and I was able to analyze and to check, the procedure is something relatively simple, can be an opportunity to revert this condition of blindness. That is something important. Brazil, at the moment, still have problems in a way to get the tissue, to get corneas, even though the main reason in our country that people are not able to see is because of lack of glasses. I don't know if you can believe that, but the point is that cornea is something really very important. I understand that's something that can be very important. I would like to start, guys, asking you, because people here in Brazil and the media is very enthusiastic about the idea, and I'm also enthusiastic about this, but could you please tell us how does it work in terms to develop a trial like this? You did the first part in animals, you did one case, but you have a long journey that you have to develop. And for those that are taking part in this audience, they want to understand what are the steps that we have to surpass every time that we do a research like this before you're going to have the product ready to work in the market. Could you put some guidelines regarding to this?
Sure. So I besides being the CEO, I manage the R&D of the company. And basically, I had previous experience in developing products, but not medical ones. And before joining Gilad, I took a extracurricular from the Technion here in Israel on how to manage R&D of medical devices. And the process is pretty straightforward. It's not easy, it's long, but for medical devices, there is a path which is very different from pharma, from vaccines or from medicine. And if you want to develop a medical device, usually start with some sort of a proof of concept, which can be a trial in one animal or even in bench test to prove that the concept works. And if you have a concept, you have to go through a very methodological and documented process before you can get the approvals. And what's different about this from the high tech is that it's got to be documented. You cannot take decision without writing them down. You have to manage your risks formally. So if an auditor comes in, he can see your decision and how you took them and how you manage the risks. So the first step is to build a representative device. And what's good about the initial phase is that you have a very defined process. It's defined in ISO standards. So depending on the risk of the device, if it's an implant, it's one process. If it's just a tool, if it's a monitoring device, if it's a test device, for each type of device, the standard actually defines what tests you have to do. In our case, it's a high-risk device. It's an implant, but it's also an implant that sits between the body and the outside. So we didn't have any shortcuts, and we have to tick all of the biocompatibility tests that you have to do. These tests are done by certified laboratories. So we have, for example, laboratories in Germany, in the US, in Israel, that helped us check that our device is not toxic, it cannot create cancer, it can irritation, and it can be accepted by the human body wherever you put it. Besides that, there are guidelines for specific devices. So for example, for keratoprosthesis, for artificial cornea, the FDA has a guidance, and the guidance says, besides all the biocompatibility tests, you have to do an animal test with rabbits, and you have to do 6 rabbits and follow them up for 6 months, and then analyze the results. And you bypass this process, you compile everything together, and you then can try to define a human study and try to convince the regulatory bodies in each countries and the hospital Helsinki committees to allow you to go to the next step, proving the safety of the device. For each different type of device, for each indication, one can define a separate clinical trial. So for example, our first clinical trial with the artificial cornea is focused on people that don't have a solution, even in countries where there is tissue. So for those who failed or are not medically candidate, These are our candidate. But if we go through this clinical trial, the FDA or the Brazilian authorities can say, all right, we allow you to use this device only in these cases. If you really want to replace a cornea, even where it exists, you have to do a larger study and follow up for more time. So what we have is called a regulatory strategy and a clinical plan. And our aim is not to just deal with those who don't have a solution, but we think our device can replace the cornea tissue in every penetrating corneal transplantation, because the optics is much better than the tissue. The surgical procedure is shorter. We think it will integrate with the body better, and the follow-up will be simpler. And our R&D plan and clinical trial include a second step where once we've proven the safety in this initial trial, we will be expanding the medical indication and aiming for the global market for corneal transplantation. Just to, just as an example, in China, there are 5 million people waiting for corneal transplantation and only 5,000 to 8,000 surgeries a year. So just in that market alone, we have a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. But we are aiming to solve corneal blindness wherever it exists. And we think that we are better than the human tissue, assuming the safety clinical trial will prove that.
You're on mute.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Now it's okay. Now we can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me? Okay, good. It's important what you said, because the audience could understand that we have different steps, different conditions in different countries. And even though I agree with you regarding that there are some differences between what we are doing here and what happens when we develop vaccines, we are in a moment that it's an opportunity to the whole world to understand what is a serious research, that things do not happen immediately. We have a lot of work before making any initiative like this. Denise de Freitas is asking us, how does the cornea integrate the prosthesis? Are there no leaks of aqueous humor at any point in the process?
Okay, so I will tell, as a reply, our experience with the animal trial. So we have 2 mechanisms to secure the integrity of the eye wall and validate that there is no leaks from the eye. In the initial period, the corneal remnant, what's left of the cornea after it's trephined, is inserted into a groove in the posterior aspect of our lens. And this groove creates a seal, sort of like putting a tire on a rim. So for the first few weeks, this seal secures the eye, both from leak and from ingress of bacteria. With time, the integrative element, which lays between the sclera and the conjunctiva, is filled with fibroblasts from the tenon. These cells are the cells that fix and renovate tissue after any kind of damage or trauma. So they come in and they embed this skirt material, and by the time the cornea might start to leak between the posterior aspect of this optical member, this seal, this initial seal that is created, by then, in all the animals we operated on, the tissue already entered our porous skirt material and sealed the eye for the long term. And throughout the 6 months follow-up, we did not see any leaks in any animals of aqueous humor outside of the eye.
Yeah, I would add that in terms of the engineering of the device, there are actually 5 different mechanisms. Some for the short term, some for the long term, and some for, throughout the process that ensure that the device stays in the eye. It's actually sutured to the eye, and it doesn't fall off or doesn't create any leak. And all these 5 mechanisms when they are implemented together, are ensuring that this will stay in the eye and maintain watertightness for good. Just as an example, this porous material, nobody really knows what will happen to it in the eye after 20 years. Nobody ever tested this. How would you know that the fibers will not be brittle or will not dissolve? So there are actually holes in the lens itself that we know tissue will grow through and stitch the lens to the eye, even if the skirt material kind of becomes very loose. This is just one example. But as I mentioned before, we have to manage the risks. So the risk of leak has a very well-defined process where we looked at it and try to reduce it as the regulatory requires, which is as far as possible.
Listen, there was a question not related. There is a question not related specifically to this implant, but Luis, as also I think he's a doctor, he's asking about something regarding the implant and retinal diseases and retinal degeneration. I know that has nothing to do, but since we have here a retinal surgeon, maybe you can give us some inputs in terms of new technologies regarding macular degeneration, since it involves almost 20% when you consider populations above 70 years old. Could you tell us something regarding to macular degeneration and perspectives?
So I'll tell you a few things regarding our device. First of all, we have examined the ability of patients suffering from macular degeneration to continue receiving Avastin shots, for example, following this implantation. So we know that there is no issue in doing intravitreal injections of these medications that are necessary to maintain good retinal health in patients with wet AMD. That's one aspect. The second aspect is once the integration is proven, of course, you know that there are many IOLs, intraocular lenses for cataract procedures that are specific for AMD. For example, a lens that enlarges the writing by 3 times, allowing an AMD patient to read. This optic solution, of course, can also be embedded in our artificial cornea. Regarding solutions for AMD, this is not what we do. There is a company in Israel called Nano Retina that creates a small chip. There's the Argus implant from the United States. But I think that these implants are still in their initial phases of development, as they do not give resolution to your vision, but rather, hand movements vision or something like that. It's very, very initial, their results. And there's still a lot of work in developing a better input, a better output from these solutions, so that the patient can really enjoy some form of sight. So this is what I can say regarding that question.
So it's also one of the worries of the elderly people. This kind of manifestations, is normal that people are asking about this. Tell me.
I can add one more thing, that we have another product that is aiming to provide a long-term solution to glaucoma, which also damaged the optic nerve. And that product is poised to provide a very simple and long-lasting solution that will replace the use of a lot of drops and all sorts of other surgeries that clog after just a few years. That product called Ishant is actually entering animal trial these days, and has a lot of potential in terms of really providing a good solution for glaucoma.
Do you guys believe that by the time, you see, this is a lens, and you are working with 3D print, do you believe it's going to be possible by the time to have any role in terms of the correction of refractive errors? In other words, can you program the surgery in a way, in a long term, to avoid even the use of glasses?
Yeah, we're actually working on that right now. So the question is how you put this plastic lens in your eye, and as you know, plastic, regardless of how much you harden it, is susceptible to scratches. And although we tested it for UV resistance, we are working on a custom lens, just like you have an iPhone screen protector, right? A soft lens that will protect the lens, will provide UV filtering, will correct. If you need 1 diopter or 2 diopter, we can provide that minute correction that is needed. And you won't need to replace it as fast as you need to replace the regular contact lens because it sits just on the plastic. Besides that, it'll also help the improving the interaction between the device and the eyelid. I mean, every time you blink, you might want something a bit more softer or hydrophilic to eliminate any interaction between these. So this little extra lens would actually resolve all of these and will allow us to correct any accommodation. When we tested the optics, and I have to mention that the optics itself of our device is better than the perfect cornea because it's designed and it's manufactured to the highest quality that exists. And if you have an IOL, for example, you've been through a cataract surgery, we can actually calculate, the optical power that we are adding to this, optical system. So at the end of the day, the idea, and this is what patients really, really want. They want to see well. Claudio, you probably know that after cornea transplantation, patients see like 50-50 or 50% will have a astigmatism, which is like 4 diopters and higher, which means that they'll have to correct it. With our device, we don't expect that to be.
I'd just like to add, Claudio, one last thing, is that currently we have a one-size spheric 42 diopter K-Pro, and if anyone, an ophthalmic surgeon, wants to, let's say, perform a triple procedure, corneal transplantation and a cataract, he can punch in K of 42 diopter with the axial length that he measures, and he can calculate the IOL in a similar fashion to the way we calculate it today, bringing the patient to ametropia. So hopefully, with using the constant of our K-Pro and manipulating IOL, you can also finish the procedure with no refractive error or even with very minute refractive error. Hopefully also in the future, this device will succeed and we will have the commercial reasoning to make it in different optical strengths and have a variety for people, for surgeons to choose. Currently, we are going through the regulation only with one size, 42 diopter. We want to prove the safety.
Yeah, I mean, once the integration is proven, in terms of playing with the optics, you can do anything you would like. You can do a multifocal. You can do filtering of a specific wavelength. You can even embed a screen, I guess, and provide magnification. Or the optics is not really the issue here.
You're right. I understand, and you put it very clearly, because corneal transplantation, you have 2 different steps. The first is to do the procedure itself in the operating room. The other one is how to remove the sutures in the right way, in a way to avoid high levels of astigmatism. What is very hard, I would say that even this point is much harder than doing the procedure itself. So in this case, you are not going to manage with something like this. It's going to be much easier. Tell us something. How many places are going to take for these future trials that you're going to develop? I read something that is going to happen even in China. Could you tell us about this?
Sure. So we have submitted approval for the K-Pro in Israel and received it. Also in Canada, we have received it from the Ministry of Health of Canada.
For the trial.
For the trial. We're talking about the trial, the clinical trial, yes?
Yeah.
So we received approval for 2 centers, one in Toronto with David Rootman and one in Vancouver. We submitted to the Dutch Ministry of Health, also with Rudy Nuitz and Ruth Lapid. And we are soon to submit in France for 2 centers. We also have on our advisory board a Chinese professor from Xiamen University who's the leader in China in corneal medicine. And we are planning a clinical trial in China after we had already initial discussions with what's called the CFDA, the Chinese FDA. And because they don't have any tissue, they want us to enlarge the trial a little bit and to target patients as a primary procedure because they have a very, very big lack of tissue. And they say, if you approve this and you show us that it's good also for primary patients, we'll start implanting this on patients who have no history of corneal transplantation. So we're also planning to initiate a trial, an extension of this trial, targeting primary indications in China. And hopefully, if everything goes well and with this COVID and everything, we plan to initiate this trial about 2 quarters this year, 2 quarters after this trial here in Israel started. So in about 6 months, we hope. We have already submitted all the paperwork to the Chinese FDA, to the NMPA. And once we get the green light, we want to start there as well. We believe that we have a huge potential and that there is a huge unmet need in China specifically.
I would add that there are also 2 sites planned in the United States. So we're going through an IDE. But in terms of the numbers, what the FDA requires and is required just to prove the safety is implantations in 20 patients and a follow-up of 1 year. This is for the initial medical indications. So we are aiming to implant this in about 30. Not all patients kind of follow all the follow-up regime. So we need more patients. So in all these centers in the West and in the Americas, in the European Americas and in Israel, we're planning to have about 30 patients. With China, given that we're going after primary indication, we'll have to add probably additional 50 or 60 in at least 2 centers in China. So, it's not yet final because we are in the midst of the discussions, but all in all, we're looking at about 90 patients for this year and the beginning of next year.
Right, because the big jump is going to happen at the moment that you can decide this as your first option. I saw that you are very careful, guys, when you decided not to put keratoconus as part of this first part of the research. We know that keratoconus is very important in terms of epidemiology. So in a long term, if you're going to be able to be a primary, it will be the ideal long term, not just for the profitability of the business, but mainly to the social problem that we have to resolve. If you're going to be able to use this as a primary option, this is going to be super in terms of recovering the vision to the population. And tell us, what is the size of the staff that you have here, and why don't you consider to do this trial even in Brazil? We do not have such a great amount of cornea here in our country.
Yes. So first of all, in terms of the trial, we've talked about the country. There are 15 full-time employees working for the company. It's important to just maybe to share that when we're talking about the trial, we are just a sponsor. The trial is conducted by the hospitals, by the physicians that we train. And by the way, we've invested and we can now train remotely our physician using a very special high-tech configuration. So we can train these physicians. So we are managing the submissions of the approvals and all of the regulatory and clinical processes, but we are focused on the R&D here in the company with most of the staff that is working here. In terms of doing that in Brazil have a separate, of course, independent regulatory processes, and it's a bit far away. And while we are not, we haven't decided to open a clinical site for the study in Brazil. Brazil is certainly a market that will be one of the first one we will approach, given we are aware of the local challenges and the epidemiology. I think that you guys also lacking a lot of tissues in the local market. So in terms of regulation, in terms of, for example, the audits that we have to go to enter Brazil, there's extra effort that is needed. And, given the merits of this solution, everybody wants to be in this trial. And we just, took the first ones that we had relationship with. The markets that, for example, the US, we are working with the two leading centers that deal with all these challenging cases that can streamline and have a lot of patients that can recruit them fast. But we are open. We're open for a discussion. We'll have many clinical trials. This is just the first one, and I see no reason why Brazil cannot be a future site for us.
Claudio, I just want to add one last thing. We had a booth in the previous ESPRS, not this one, because it was virtual due to the COVID, but the previous one, and I had various meetings with colleagues from Brazil, very pleasant meetings, but they all said that this solution is most needed in Brazil, and they all asked us to inform them the minute we are advancing this solution in Brazil. So we had a lot of your colleagues, ophthalmologists from Brazilian ophthalmologists, approach our booth and tell us that this solution is very much needed in your country. And of course, we will be more than happy to start working in Brazil.
Socialize with more people that are here in the audience. And Dr. De Freitas has already written, listen, it's going to be a pleasure to work with them here in our country. We have the biggest universal system on healthcare all over the world. More than 210 million people are living here. So many important studies that are happening all over the world, they also happen here. So we could discuss for the future, maybe to develop something together here among us. Tell me more points, and people that are curious about how is the situation or the environment so positive in a country like Israel to create so many startups, even in ophthalmology. It's because you're part of the army? Tell us.
So I've been in the high tech and managed a startup in that specific market, and I've been asked these questions many times by people from many countries. And I think that of course, the experience you get at an early stage, being exposed to high tech technologies, is extreme when you are serving in the army. I spent 8 years in the Israeli Air Force. And I've been involved in technical projects, in improvements of avionics systems and in software development of systems with multi-million-dollar investment in each. So at age 26, I was a project manager managing a project with 150 man-years of software development. You can't get that experience in the commercial side of things. So a lot of people that gone through technical education are getting real world experience in the army, and when they go out, they have some experience with developing, deploying, and actually working with customers on these solutions, and they're also able to cooperate with a lot of high-tech companies in doing so. That is one thing, but not enough. There are many other countries where you serve in the army. I think the second arm is the climate in Israel, which started in the late 90s, whereas the government took active steps in encouraging VCs and building a vibrant VC industry by subsidizing their investment in startups. Actually, my previous chairman was Dr. Shuki Gleitman, who was previously the chief scientist of the Israeli Ministry of Industry and Trade. And he was actually the one back then that worked on that program, which was extremely successful. Now, once VCs come into Israel and start investing in startups, they start a community, and if this goes well, they will invest more. And these global VCs still exist here and continue to invest in startups generally. For medical companies, I think that we have good schools. Maybe Gilad can talk to that. But it's also about the network. I can tell you, I'm on a WhatsApp group that its name is CEO Ophthalmology. So I have 25 CEOs managing ophthalmic startups, pharma, and devices. And I can get help on anything I want. I'm looking for employees. I'm looking for managing clinical trials. I'm looking for advice. We're sharing information about VCs and our experience. And that networking, which is very vibrant in Israel, the type of us, we are very outgoing in a way. This type of community help seed more and more startups. And even today, there are special programs that help fund and seed companies that eventually some of them turn to successful ones.
Ask you to add my name in this group of WhatsApp. I want to listen about your comments. Let me ask you something. It comes from our president, Renato Ochman. Tell us about the business itself. How is the business going? Tell us about, in terms of investment, how many people have already put money on that? Details that, if you're open to discuss this and to tell us some details. Is it possible for you to talk about this?
Sure. We about 2 weeks ago, there was a very big event that usually takes place in San Francisco every January. That is called the JPM Week. And that's where investors and companies meet. During this week, San Francisco is full of physicians and investors, and there are many things that are taking place. And I actually presented the company as part of one of the events there. So I must tell you that CorNeat is very different from the standard startup. So far, we have raised over $12 million. More than 10 of them are from private investors in 2 rounds, and there was one last little round that was induced by COVID. And all of them were done in common stock from private investors. So there are some high net worth individuals. From many countries, we have investors from South Africa, from China, from the UK, that put their own money in the company. Now we have 4 products under development, and it'll take approximately $20 million to complete all of these clinical trials, scale up our manufacturing, and launch these products to market. But they on themselves have potential of bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars, of course, gradually. But what we realized going into our next round, which will open next month, is that we have several additional very promising applications to our core platform technology. And after advising with some investment bankers and people that are coming from the industry, we are aiming to open a very significant round and also develop several other products with the same technology. By the way, one of our products is already in development, is a synthetic implant for gingival recession. So 50% of the elderly suffer from gingival recession. And the problem is that your tissue kind of grow down until your root is exposed. And all of the solutions today are biological, and they only last for a few years. Nothing is there holding the gingiva back. So just this product alone has the merits of establishing a company. So we will be aiming in our next round to raise double that number that we originally thought. So something in the range of 40 to 50. And the idea is to build a multi-billion-dollar company with the achievements that we've gone so far. So there are, as I mentioned, applications in orthopedics, applications in gynecology, in plastic surgery, and general surgery, that are today all are using biological material that are degradable. And we believe that we have something much better that will provide patients with long-term retention and viability that we can leverage.
That your company competes with cell therapy?
No, we are not tissue engineering or cell therapy. We are looking more on the mechanical aspect. And we can rehabilitate tissue. There are many scaffolds that can be used to fix soft tissue, but none of them actually last there forever. What we are bringing in is this iron infrastructure into the tissue that does not exist in the market today.
Magazine Isto É, an important magazine here in Brazil. This is like a dream, but when you have a dream, you have a future. And they ask, from the first transplant, can we imagine that blindness due to corneal problems will no longer exist?
I have to be cautious as a doctor. I have to be a little bit cautious, Claudio, because we know that biology is very surprising, and you never know. You know, the rabbit, it parted with us in the evolution about 90 million years ago. So the fact that I implanted it in many rabbits and it succeeded, it's still not proof in humans. We have the initial patient who regained his sight and has no pain. And we are now 3 weeks after the implantation. Give me 3 more months and I'll give you a much more validated answer, something that I can stand behind. But right now, in this euphoria of everybody being so excited about this solution, and we are also excited. We have been working 5 years to bring this dream into reality, but I cannot state right now that everything will be solved. If we are successful and the integration works like we believe, then I believe tissue will no longer be the obstacle in regaining sight when you are corneally blind.
I will add my angle. I try to look for my first business card, but just to tell you a little story, I think I printed Gilad's first business card. He didn't have a business card as a physician. And on the back side of that business card, there were 3 words. It was written, corneal blindness, period, history. And I remember showing this to Professor Ehud Hassia, who was considered kind of the top ophthalmologist here in Israel. He looked at it and he kind of gave me a little smile. But that's our target. Our target is to solve this. And even if this first device still will need some improvements, I think that we are on a path to getting it done.
Dr. Freitas has registered once again that here in our country, you have a long queue, a long line, more than a year before being able to make a procedure like this. So it's an important center in a way that we work together. I also want to register that Jaime Blay, our former president, was taking part, and he was making so many enthusiastic comments about your presentation. And my final points before coming back to Renato Ochman. I'm very enthusiastic about what you presented. I saw that you have few indications at the beginning, and it's normal that we start slowly because, as you said, when you do research, you need safety before everything, and these are the rules, even not only because of regulatory conditions, but because of ethical conditions. We cannot progress before being absolutely sure that it's going to add value and not cause any damage in terms of in big scale to the whole population. So I see that you are very careful, guys, and it's important to continue like this. I remember that we were together in Israel and became enthusiastic at the time. Today I'm more enthusiastic. I see that you are growing. You have more people that are getting together. You are bringing investors. You are creating conditions like a big enterprise for the future. The market is amazing in terms of size. Opportunities that are not related to cornea are important because in the moment that you use this kind of initiative in one point of the body, it can be a stimulus for you to develop other opportunities. And you said something about teeth. It's something very important because in the long term, people, they do not want to live without teeth. But if you do not have a structure to insert the teeth, they are not going to work. And the moment that people do not have teeth, they are not able to eat according to what is important. So everything is very enthusiastic, and I want once again to thank you for your participation, to say that I'm very proud of observing what you're able to build. And more than that, I want once again to thank my good friend Renato Ochman for his kindly invitation. I'm proud of his work. I have known him for almost 40 years. I'm proud of his career as an important lawyer in our country, and today very proud of his condition as the president of our Brazilian Israeli Chamber. Renato, please.
I would just like to, Renato, if you can let me a few words. I would like also to thank you said about the careful choosing of patients, and I want to mention Irit Bachar, Professor Irit Bachar, who is the surgeon who performed the first implantation. And I can tell you she received the approval about 2.5 months ago, 3 months ago, but she was looking for the right patient. And she didn't, and she had many patients come in and say, we want to be in this trial, but she looked for the right one, that the procedure would go according to plan. It won't be too challenging. So I completely agree with you. I wanted also to commend her and to thank her and her hospital, the Beilinson Hospital. Thank you, Renato. Excuse me.
Cláudio, thank you very much for moderating this conversation. And I can tell you that it was amazing conversation, and we can conclude that the complexity and the efforts you made to achieve the success of this unique technology was great. And as you may know, we have a few VC investors in our audience, and they are asking me in my cell phone when we can have a new conversation about business and a roadshow of your CorNeat to our associates. So we can talk later, but as you may know, this is a very nice and interesting side of your business that we can facilitate here also in Brazil. And
for these, we have posted all our material from 2 weeks ago, including my recorded pitch and one-pager. So if you can stream their contacts, I can share that with you. And we will be starting a formal round at the second week of February. We are still working on the numbers and the Excels and the business plan and updating it so it will reflect the most recent developments. And once we'll be ready, we will be able to share it and discuss business.
Okay, of course. So send us the info and we will circulate to our associates. It will be a pleasure, okay? And especially if our associate has a little discount for investor, makes sense, okay? So thank you again very much, Gilad, Almog, and Cláudio, for joining this event. And it was a pleasure. Obrigado a todos por terem participado. Uma boa semana. Vamos nos ver em breve com um novo evento. E se cuidem. Bye. Thank you very much.
Shalom.